What happens when a global icon confronts a fallen prince on the biggest royal stage of the year? During Trooping the Color, with cameras rolling and the world watching, David Beckham walked past Prince Harry and stunned onlookers with just 6 brutal words. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." Harry wasn't supposed to be there. He showed up uninvited. But what triggered Beckham to break his silence? Why did King Charles personally ban Harry and in the same breath, prepare to knight Beckham? In this exclusive investigation, we uncover the hidden scandal that forced the crown's hand and the silent war behind the royal family's most humiliating public moment yet. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was supposed to be a day of majestic celebration, tradition, and unity. Trooping the Color, a royal spectacle symbolizing the enduring strength and ceremony of the British monarchy. But as the military procession thundered through the mall, the streets of London buzzed with something far less polished. Royal watchers were not focused on the grand carriages, the perfectly synchronized horses, or the beloved appearance of Princess Charlotte waving from the balcony. Instead, the eyes of the nation and the world were glued to a single man who wasn't supposed to be there. Prince Harry. Uninvited, unannounced, unwelcome. Against direct orders from the palace, Harry appeared near the entrance of Horse Guards Parade, looking noticeably out of place. No uniform, no insignia, no position. His presence wasn't ceremonial, it was defiant. A ghost from the monarchy's past, re-emerging on the one day meant to showcase the power and stability of its present. But what shocked the public even more was not Harry's bold intrusion. It was David Beckham's response. Dressed in morning dress befitting the occasion, Beckham had just arrived to take his place alongside honored guests. Cameras caught him pausing briefly as he spotted Harry in the crowd. What followed was an exchange that exploded across every tabloid, royal blog, and political podcast within hours. No smile, no handshake, no pleasantries. Instead, Beckham, visibly firm and composed, leaned in close to Harry. A short sentence, delivered like a final verdict, was barely audible through the hum of ceremonial music and applause. But lip readers, professional analysts, and those close to the scene confirmed it. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." Those 6 words carried the weight of a decade's worth of tension, betrayal, and media warfare. But to truly understand why this moment mattered, why it resonated far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace, we need to peel back the layers of history, personal rivalries, broken alliances, and a shocking development involving millions in hidden charity funds, a silent whistleblower from within the royal fold, and a decision by King Charles himself to honor Beckham with one of the highest titles in the land. In the hours that followed Beckham's cold confrontation, the royal establishment didn't flinch. Instead, it pivoted. Rumors that had been simmering quietly behind closed palace doors erupted into full-blown scandal. Leaks from inside Clarence House and Kensington Palace revealed that not only had Harry been banned from the event, but that the ban had been deliberately leaked to warn him. He came anyway, and that decision could cost him far more than public humiliation. Why did David Beckham, known for diplomacy, grace, and his polished public image, feel emboldened enough to call out a royal, in public, with such disdain? And why, shortly after the altercation, did senior aides confirm that Beckham is now being vetted for an official knighthood, to be bestowed by King Charles personally in a ceremony later this year? The answers are far darker and more explosive than the cameras captured on the surface. This story isn't just about a royal feud. It's about betrayal behind palace walls. It's about a global icon who refused to be used as a pawn in the Sussex PR machine. It's about a powerful whistleblower, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, who quietly uncovered what sources are calling the most disturbing misuse of royal-linked charity money in modern memory. Millions, allegedly rerouted from official initiatives to a hidden California LLC tied directly to Meghan Markle. This is a story about consequences, about how the system reclaims its dignity, about how trust, once broken, cannot be repaired with apologies whispered through Oprah specials or Netflix documentaries. When Prince Harry walked away from the monarchy in 2020, many sympathized. The narrative painted him as a disillusioned prince, a man escaping the archaic rituals of royal life to protect his wife and their future. But as the years unfolded, a different picture began to emerge. Lawsuits against British tabloids, accusations of racism leveled against unnamed royal family members, a tell-all memoir that scorched every bridge left standing. And yet, amidst the drama, Harry seemed to expect the red carpet would always be rolled back out for him. But not this time. Not on King Charles's watch. Not while the integrity of the crown was at stake. Insiders say King Charles was resolute. There would be no seat for Harry on the balcony. No honorary mention. No quiet entrance through a side door. He was no longer an active working royal. He had crossed a line. This year's Trooping the Color would serve as a reassertion of royal authority, clean, dignified, and untainted. Beckham, having endured years of silent humiliation at the hands of the Sussexes' perceived betrayals, was now being elevated. He had remained loyal, charitable, and focused. His work with youth empowerment, football outreach, and veterans through the prince's trust didn't go unnoticed. Sources close to the palace describe King Charles as viewing Beckham as a model citizen, someone who embodies the very values Harry abandoned. But Beckham's public rebuke was not a premeditated act of vengeance. It was an emotional outburst long in the making, rooted in a deep personal grievance. Few remember that David and Victoria Beckham were once close to Meghan and Harry. Dinners, private texts, shared events. It was, for a time, a blossoming A-list friendship. But after a leak to the press, one that exposed private messages between Victoria and Meghan, Beckham was livid. He confronted Harry. He demanded an explanation. What he got was silence. That silence ended on the parade ground. As Beckham walked away, cool and unshaken, Harry remained frozen, stunned, unsure of what to do next. He had come for visibility. He left with humiliation. Media analysts described the moment as a symbolic coronation of loyalty over celebrity. Others were less diplomatic. One headline simply read, "From Palace to Pariah, Harry's royal rejection is complete." But this isn't just a story of optics. It's a story of what power looks like when wielded with discretion. Sophie's quiet role in all this, meticulously tracking irregularities in Sussex-linked charity transactions, has barely begun to unfold. We will later uncover how she presented her findings to King Charles and Queen Camilla in a private meeting 2 months before Trooping the Color. How those documents linked multiple charities to a single LLC registered under a Delaware-based holding company. How donor funds, originally earmarked for causes like youth mental health and veteran support, were funneled to an account that raised red flags in both British and American financial watchdog systems. When those findings were corroborated, the palace moved swiftly and quietly. First came the ban, then the final approval for Beckham's knighthood, and then the cold, hard silence toward the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The monarchy didn't need a statement. The message was delivered loud and clear, through action, through honor, and through 6 quiet words spoken in full daylight. You're a backstabber. You don't belong here. And for the first time in years, Prince Harry had no rebuttal, no press release, no video message, no tear-filled podcast, only silence. This is not just the story of a feud. It's the beginning of the monarchy drawing its battle lines between the loyal and the lost, the honored and the ousted. The royal household was unusually silent in the days leading up to Trooping the Color. Behind the elegant facades of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, tension was thick enough to slice with a blade. Every corridor, every secure conference room, every red leather folder passed between aides pulsed with urgency. What the public didn't know, but was on the brink of discovering, was that this year's ceremony had been marked with an unprecedented royal directive. Prince Harry was not to attend under any circumstances. This wasn't a simple snub. It was a royal order, quietly distributed across key departments, security, logistics, public relations, and private secretaries. It was clear. It was deliberate. It was final. The decision came directly from King Charles, and it was neither emotionally made nor publicly justified. But internally, senior courtiers and trusted advisors understood why this step was not only necessary, it was overdue. After 3 years of turbulence, public fallout, tell-all interviews, and family secrets sold for syndication, Charles had had enough. Harry's repeated attempts to blur the line between independence and entitlement had reached their limit. He had demanded the privileges of royalty without the accountability. He had claimed injury while wielding words like weapons against the very institution that raised him. And now, with whispers of financial impropriety linked to his U.S.-based charitable operations swirling among legal departments, the palace had to protect the crown's dignity at all costs. Days before the event, Prince Harry made contact through informal back channels. Emails, calls, and text messages were sent not to Charles directly, because those lines had long gone cold, but to palace staffers he still believed might sympathize with his plight. Some ignored him. Others responded with polite deflections. The one that stung the most came from Princess Beatrice's office, a vague message wishing him well but offering no invitation or means of access. It was clear the family had closed ranks. Behind the scenes, Queen Camilla was firm in her support of the king's decision. She had long been skeptical of Harry's intentions. She viewed the Netflix documentary and the Oprah interview not as moments of honesty, but as precision strikes, intended to humiliate, destabilize, and commercialize private grief. While Camilla rarely weighed in on public-facing matters, she made it clear to Charles in their weekly briefing that a moment of royal unity was desperately needed, and that the inclusion of a divisive figure like Harry would undermine the entire occasion. At Kensington Palace, Prince William remained silent, but not absent. His influence over royal decisions had grown substantially in the past year. Sources close to the household said he didn't press for a public rejection of his brother, but he did ask a single, pointed question during one late-night conversation with Charles. Do you really believe he'll respect the protocol if he thinks it gets him press coverage? That question lingered in Charles's mind for hours. The answer was found not in speeches, but in actions. Harry's attendance at the coronation had been begrudging, brief, and awkward. His body language was stiff, his placement far from the central royal core. Afterward, he reportedly left the country within hours, skipping all private family moments to return to California. Even then, tabloid sources said Meghan had expressed disdain over how he was treated, claiming he had been reduced to a guest at his own father's ceremony. But the king's patience had its limits. By the time trooping the color preparations were finalized, Harry's exclusion had become a matter of operational priority. His name was not listed in any procession documents. No carriage or vehicle was reserved. No wardrobe instructions or military honors were scheduled. The Royal Communications Office was instructed to prepare for potential leaks. But under no circumstances was the media to be offered a no-comment statement. The palace would not dignify disruption with recognition. In Montecito, Harry was reportedly livid. The idea of being shut out of the very institution he had once represented so proudly stung more deeply than expected. While he had walked away in search of freedom, he had never truly imagined that freedom would mean permanent exile. Meghan, for her part, had a different response. Advisors close to the couple claimed she viewed the ban as an opportunity, another chapter to be spun for sympathy, another example of how the system punishes those who try to speak the truth. What neither of them anticipated was how far the palace was willing to go this time. On the morning of the event, security was doubled. Identification checks were extended. Even media personnel, many of whom had covered royal events for decades, noted the increased caution in how entrances were guarded. Intelligence teams had been briefed. If Harry were to attempt a last-minute appearance, he would be turned away, not publicly, but firmly, through a side entrance to avoid a media scene. But that's not how Harry operated anymore. He knew that cameras would be watching. He knew that headlines would be written regardless of whether he was welcomed or not. And so, with calculated precision, he arrived not at a royal entrance, but near the public cordons, dressed as a well-heeled civilian. He walked slowly, head high, as onlookers turned and gasped. Some reached for phones. Others whispered. But no one cheered. Harry expected tension. What he didn't expect was indifference. The public, once emotionally torn by his feud with the royal family, had begun to grow weary. Sympathy had decayed into exhaustion. And the moment he arrived, it became clear this was not a reunion. It was a provocation. Inside the palace, news of his presence arrived swiftly. Courtiers relayed information with urgency. Senior aides looked to the king. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for confirmation. He simply turned a page in the speech he was reviewing, glanced at Camilla, and said, "If he's outside, let him stay outside." But it wasn't just Charles who took notice. David Beckham, arriving minutes later, had been briefed in advance. Not as a security concern, but as a matter of optics. He had no reason to expect a confrontation, but as he stepped from the vehicle and made his way toward the ceremonial grounds, there stood Harry. A moment passed. Two worlds collided. Beckham didn't smile, didn't pause for photographs, didn't offer a handshake. Witnesses described the moment as frozen in time. Beckham leaned in slightly, his voice low but direct, and issued the words that would echo across the globe within hours. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." That one sentence, whispered under the sound of marching drums and royal trumpets, became the symbolic decree that the monarchy itself had not spoken aloud. There was no outburst, no confrontation, just a statement of fact, one that seemed to carry the entire weight of a country's shifting loyalties. And Harry knew, in that instant, that he was no longer the rogue prince. He was a man on the outside of history, standing in the shadow of an institution he no longer recognized, and that no longer recognized him. The most painful part? It was all orchestrated without shouting, without scandal, and without spectacle. It was quiet, royal, calculated. As the ceremony began and the royal family took their places, Harry was nowhere to be seen on the balcony. David Beckham, however, stood proudly among the honored guests, his knighthood all but confirmed. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, walked with calm confidence, her role in exposing the Sussex charity scandal still hidden from public view, but deeply respected behind palace doors. The divide had never been clearer. By the end of the day, press coverage shifted. No longer did stories ask why Harry had been excluded. They asked why he had shown up at all. The palace didn't respond. It didn't need to. Its message had been delivered, through actions, not words. There was a growing restlessness in Montecito as the date for trooping the color drew nearer. For most, the anticipation centered on pomp, tradition, and the king's second appearance at the royal balcony following his coronation. But for Prince Harry, it marked a pivotal moment, an opportunity to reinsert himself into the very narrative that had pushed him to the margins. And for Meghan Markle, it was an opportunity to challenge the silent wall of exclusion that the palace had been methodically building around them. Though officially severed from royal duties, Harry hadn't completely given up the desire for recognition. A part of him still craved validation, not only from the public but from his own family. The thought of standing once again among his kin during such a symbolic moment, even if only briefly, had been haunting him for weeks. He knew he wasn't invited. He knew the palace had made its position clear, but he convinced himself, and those around him, that his presence would still be accepted. After all, he was still the king's son, still a prince by blood, still, in his mind, someone who belonged. In the days before the ceremony, Harry began reaching out to former allies. He avoided direct communication with Charles or William. Those bridges were thoroughly burned, but instead turned to second-tier royals, former aides, and even palace staffers who had once been friendly with him. Messages were sent through encrypted apps, calls made under the guise of catching up. But the intention was transparent. Harry wanted back in. Princess Beatrice, who had long tried to stay neutral, was one of the first he contacted. Her reply was courteous, but cautious. A source close to her later revealed that while Beatrice was sympathetic to her cousin's emotional turmoil, she was unwilling to jeopardize her own standing within the royal fold. She had only recently been granted more visibility in royal events and wasn't prepared to gamble that on a rogue appearance orchestrated by a disgraced prince. Prince Edward, Harry's uncle, received a similar outreach. While once regarded as a calming force within the family, Edward's patience had reportedly been tested by Harry's relentless accusations aired in interviews and memoirs. His response was firm, relayed through a private assistant. There would be no intervention on Harry's behalf. The matter was closed. Even staffers who had once worked under Harry during his time as a senior royal declined to assist. The fear of retribution from the palace was simply too great. Some even blocked his number. Others replied with empty excuses. The response was consistent. Harry was alone in this. As doors closed one after another, Meghan remained oddly calm. She viewed the rejection not as a dead end, but as material, an opportunity, a chance to highlight yet again how the royal family continued to marginalize their own. She suggested Harry simply show up, not in defiance, but in quiet assertion of his place in the lineage. Her belief was that showing the world he still had the right to be present, even if denied access, would win him sympathy. Let the public decide, she allegedly said to him one morning over tea. They'll see who's being dignified and who's being cold. But Harry wasn't completely naive. He knew the monarchy played a long game. If he showed up like an intruder, it could backfire catastrophically. So he set out to carefully calibrate his approach. He wouldn't arrive in royal garb. He wouldn't enter through the family gates. He would remain on the edge, present, but not confrontational. He hoped that this gray area might force the palace's hand, or at least spark a public discussion that favored him. Back-channel attempts at reconciliation continued even up to the night before trooping the color. Meghan reached out to a former friend now married into aristocracy, asking whether there was a backdoor entrance for close acquaintances of royal guests. The friend, caught off guard, declined to respond. Another attempt through a celebrity PR consultant linked to a member of the royal household also hit a dead end. "He is not on the list," came the blunt reply. Meanwhile, inside the palace, preparations to counter any potential disruption were well underway. A private meeting was held between the director of royal security, representatives from the Metropolitan Police, and key palace aides. Harry was not seen as a threat in the traditional sense, but the optics of him showing up uninvited posed a security and narrative risk that could derail the entire event. Special attention was paid to potential entry points around the Horse Guards Parade and St. James's Park. If Harry showed up, security would be instructed to manage the situation discreetly. No altercations. No public detainment. The aim was clear: avoid a media spectacle. On the morning of the ceremony, while the royals dressed for the occasion and final checks were made on the balcony arrangements, Harry left Montecito quietly. He boarded a commercial flight to London under a pseudonym, accompanied only by one aide. No media outlets were alerted. No photographers met him at the airport. For once, he craved discretion. He arrived at a private London residence late at night, hours before Trooping the Colour was scheduled to begin. He didn't inform any royals of his arrival, but word still traveled. By dawn, whispers of Harry's presence in the city had reached the ears of senior aides. One of Charles's most trusted secretaries confirmed the information and immediately escalated it to the king. Charles, finishing his breakfast while reviewing his ceremonial notes, reportedly paused briefly, glanced out the window, and said, "Let him see what silence feels like." By mid-morning, Harry had taken a car to the outskirts of the ceremonial route. He wasn't dressed as a royal, nor in military attire. Instead, he wore a tailored civilian suit, expensive but understated. His intention was to blend in, but he was quickly recognized. Spectators near the barriers murmured as they noticed him. Some pointed. A few offered polite greetings, unsure how to react. But there were no cheers, no outbursts of support. It was awkward, quiet, cold. Harry didn't push past any barriers. He didn't demand entry, but he lingered, just long enough to be seen. Cameras picked him up. The media quickly caught on. Within minutes, images began circulating online. Prince Harry, standing alone, on the sidelines of Trooping the Colour. A prince with no position. A symbol without a place. He watched as royal carriages passed. He watched as David Beckham arrived, shaking hands with dignitaries and posing for photographs. He watched as members of his family, once his world, moved gracefully through a spectacle he no longer had access to. Then came the most unexpected moment. Beckham, approaching the same entrance path as Harry, paused as their eyes met. No photographers stood between them. No royal aides buffered the moment. Their exchange was short, but historic. What was said remains a matter of debate. But multiple sources, including professional lip readers and bystanders, confirmed that Beckham leaned in and delivered a quiet but unmistakable rebuke. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." Harry's expression changed instantly. His jaw tightened. He looked as if the words had physically struck him. For a brief moment, he stood frozen. Then, without another word, Beckham turned and walked on, joining the ranks of those honored by the monarchy, leaving Harry adrift. As the procession began, Harry slipped away. He didn't return to his hotel immediately. Instead, he spent an hour walking through nearby streets, avoiding major intersections, ducking into alleyways when he saw journalists or onlookers. It was a moment of solitude, of reckoning. The country he once represented had moved on, and he had been left behind, not just by his family, but by a nation growing weary of his grievances. That evening, palace aides issued a subtle press statement. Today's Trooping the Colour was a celebration of tradition and unity. We thank all invited guests for honoring the sanctity of the occasion. No mention of Harry. No reference to controversy. Just a message of tight-lipped decorum. Harry, back in his hotel suite, declined all calls. Meghan reportedly stayed in California with their children. The public silence from their camp was notable. Usually quick to issue statements or post carefully worded social media messages, this time, there was nothing. Perhaps for the first time, they had nothing to say. From the moment his name first appeared on the guest list for Trooping the Colour, David Beckham's presence was bound to draw attention. The global football icon had always been admired not just for his athletic prowess, but for the way he seamlessly straddled the line between celebrity and statesman. Over the years, he had refined his public image into something more polished than most of his peers. Where others courted headlines, Beckham curated legacy. And now, his journey had brought him to the heart of the British monarchy, not as a guest of spectacle, but as a man of trust, loyalty, and earned honor. His invitation was not a public affair. There was no press release, no pre-event announcement. But within certain circles at Buckingham Palace, it had been quietly noted that David Beckham was being considered for a knighthood. The king, it was said, saw in Beckham the very traits that now seemed lost in his own son: humility, service, discipline, and unwavering commitment to country. For years, Beckham had supported the Prince's Trust, one of Charles's most personal and ambitious charitable initiatives. He had helped launch youth employment programs, made private donations, and attended dozens of low-key events that didn't make headlines. While Harry and Meghan were busy shaping their own foundation in the glare of global media, Beckham kept his work quiet, refusing to turn his philanthropy into a product. Inside royal circles, this hadn't gone unnoticed. The king's private secretary had reportedly presented a list of candidates for honorific recognition several months earlier. Beckham's name stood out, not just for his celebrity, but for the rare consistency of his service. Not once had he publicly criticized the monarchy. Not once had he aligned himself with scandal or tabloid spin. In a world where loyalty had become a rare currency, Beckham's account was overflowing. The morning of Trooping the Color, Beckham arrived at Clarence House dressed in a classic black morning coat with a gray waistcoat and dove-colored cravat. The tailoring was impeccable, the look stately, and yet unmistakably modern. The cameras caught him exiting his car with that familiar blend of calm assurance and practiced restraint. As photographers shouted for attention, he gave only a small smile and a nod. Inside, courtiers greeted him respectfully. Staff members, many of whom had worked under the king for decades, felt a palpable shift. Beckham was not there as a footballer, not as a guest of the pageantry. He had been invited as a trusted ally of the crown. And in the background of royal discontent, that positioning spoke volumes. Sources close to the palace revealed that King Charles had personally requested Beckham's attendance. The move was quiet but strategic. In the face of Harry's ongoing public antics, Charles wanted to elevate voices that represented the monarchy's enduring values. Beckham, having distanced himself from the Sussexes following a well-publicized fallout, was the perfect choice. That fallout, while not extensively covered at the time, had been dramatic. Once close friends with Meghan and Harry, the Beckhams had been drawn into the Sussex orbit during the early days of their marriage. There were dinners, shared messages, and even whispered rumors of future joint projects. But that camaraderie dissolved abruptly after a leaked tabloid story claimed Meghan had accused Victoria Beckham of being the source of a private media leak. According to insiders, Beckham was furious. Not only had the accusation been false, but it had been delivered without evidence, without even a direct conversation. In Beckham's world, where trust and loyalty are sacred, such betrayal was unforgivable. After confronting Harry and receiving what he perceived as a lukewarm, evasive response, Beckham severed contact. There were no public statements, no Instagram unfollows, just a deliberate, enduring silence. And within elite circles, silence is often more powerful than any headline. So when Beckham arrived at Trooping the Color, his presence was heavy with meaning. Here was a man who had once dined with the Sussexes and was now standing shoulder to shoulder with the very establishment they had abandoned. Here was a man once seen as a glamorous outsider who had now become a figure of internal trust. As he was ushered to his seat near the ceremonial grounds, his path took him directly past a commotion among the crowd. There, half shielded by a group of photographers and guards, stood Prince Harry, uninvited, unsupported, and clearly out of place. Beckham paused. It was brief, but unmistakable. Their eyes met. The temperature shifted. A moment passed between two men who had once laughed over champagne and late-night texts, now bound only by the memory of that friendship's ruin. Beckham took a slow step forward, leaned in slightly, and uttered a single sentence. Multiple lip readers and eyewitnesses confirmed the phrase. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." There was no raised voice, no visible tension, just a calm, assertive tone that made Harry recoil. For Beckham, the confrontation wasn't planned. It wasn't theatrical, but it was necessary. Sources later said that Beckham had felt compelled to speak because he could not abide Harry's attempt to hijack an event meant to celebrate duty and unity. In Beckham's view, Harry had forfeited his place the moment he chose to monetize his grievances. After the moment passed, Beckham continued toward the palace. His walk was steady, his expression unshaken. And behind him, the weight of that brief exchange lingered like the sound of a distant drum. Inside the royal reception area, Beckham was greeted not just with courtesy but with genuine warmth. The king, though busy with final preparations, reportedly took time to shake Beckham's hand personally. He thanked him for years of loyalty, praised his charitable efforts, and made a quiet comment, one that, while unrecorded, was shared later among aides. It's men like you who remind the crown what character really is. Later that afternoon, while the royal family assembled on the balcony and cheers rang out across the mall, Beckham stood beside dignitaries and decorated military officers. He wasn't on the balcony, but his position among the honored guests made a clear statement. He was in the king's circle now. And unlike Harry, he had earned his place. Later that evening, news broke that Beckham had been shortlisted for a knighthood. The announcement was not official yet, but sources close to the cabinet office confirmed it was all but secured. The honor would recognize not only his services to football, but his quiet, enduring contributions to British charity, diplomacy, and youth development. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Beckham trended on social media for hours, with hashtags like Sir David and Knight Beckham lighting up across platforms. Editorials praised the decision, noting how Beckham had gracefully transformed from footballer to statesman. But more than the honor itself, what caught the nation's attention was the symbolism. In Beckham, many saw the kind of man Prince Harry could have become. A public figure who leveraged fame into service, who honored tradition while embracing change, who made mistakes but never turned his back on the people who raised him. And perhaps that's why the moment stung Harry so deeply. Because David Beckham had never been born into royalty, but he had earned his way into its highest halls. And in doing so, he had illuminated just how far Harry had fallen. The roar of the crowd was rising. Drums echoed in rhythmic perfection as the household division prepared to deliver one of the most iconic military spectacles in the United Kingdom. Trooping the color was not just tradition, it was theater, identity, and authority fused into one national moment. The line of carriages was forming. Gold braids shimmered in the sun. The royal balcony, framed by Union Jacks and polished lenses of global media, waited for its familiar cast of characters. But amid the ceremony, something deeply personal and unscripted was brewing in the shadowed corners of the crowd. A moment not captured in the official broadcast, but one that would dominate headlines and social media discussion for days to come. The cameras were rolling, but not all were pointed at the parade. Some were sweeping the crowd for reaction shots, some zooming in on faces familiar and unfamiliar. In that dance between focus and distraction, the lens caught something unexpected. Prince Harry, uninvited and visibly out of place, standing not with family, not with honored guests, but among loosely controlled outer rings of security and VIP access. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. As the royal procession moved closer, so did the man who would bring Harry's brief, uncomfortable presence to a sudden emotional climax, David Beckham. Dressed impeccably in a tailored black morning suit, Beckham had just exited his official vehicle and was making his way toward the ceremonial zone designated for guests of honor. His arrival was purposeful. His posture was that of someone who understood the moment, not just as a public figure, but as a man entrusted with quiet power. Beckham wasn't walking fast. He never did in public settings. Every movement was deliberate, composed, understated. As he passed one of the secured perimeters, aides guiding him noticed the atmosphere shift. Murmurs among the guards. A slight disruption in the flow of the crowd. A familiar face had been spotted. Beckham's eyes found Harry's within seconds. And for a moment, the history between them charged the air with unspoken electricity. Harry didn't smile. He didn't raise a hand in greeting. He simply stood, locked in place as though waiting for something, perhaps acknowledgement, or perhaps confrontation. What he got was a stunning, silent rebuke wrapped in 6 words. Beckham didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesticulate or make a show for the cameras. He walked up to within a few feet of Harry, leaned in slightly, and spoke softly. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." The world didn't hear it in real time, but Harry did. His face shifted, an instant and visible tightening of the jaw, the blink of surprise masking a pang of humiliation. He had anticipated coldness. He had not anticipated open rejection from someone who once called him friend. The words were brief, but they cut deep, because they came from a man who had nothing to gain by saying them. Beckham wasn't a politician. He wasn't a royal. He had no reason to provoke a scene unless the moment demanded honesty. And in that brief interaction, Beckham delivered what the monarchy never publicly would, a plain-spoken truth. The phrase, "you don't belong here," wasn't just about location. It was about loyalty, about trust, about the invisible line Harry had crossed when he aired decades of private grievance for the price of a production deal. It was about the betrayal felt by those who had stood beside him in friendship, only to be dragged through the dirt by association. What followed the encounter was an almost eerie silence. Beckham didn't stop walking. He didn't turn back. He continued toward his designated spot with the poise of someone who had just performed a civic duty. There was no anger in his stride, no regret. He had said what needed to be said. Harry, on the other hand, was left standing in a growing cloud of awkwardness. Security took notice. Some murmurs spread through the closest ranks of journalists. It became apparent that this wasn't just a random presence in the crowd. This was a prince with no invitation and no allies. Within minutes, the encounter had been captured on multiple angles by media personnel. Some had managed to record snippets of audio. Others posted still frames. Lip readers began analyzing footage within the hour. When the phrase was confirmed and widely shared across social platforms, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Public forums lit up with fierce debate. Some defended Harry, citing his rights as the king's son. But a louder majority applauded Beckham for his candor. They saw it not as an attack, but as a long-overdue moment of moral clarity. Editorials began publishing stories with biting titles. Beckham says what the crown won't. 6 words that ended the fantasy, Prince versus Patriot. But while the public was dissecting the moment, the palace was observing it in silence. No official reaction. No leaks. No briefings. Buckingham Palace operated on a strategy of restraint, and in this case, Beckham had done their work for them. He had articulated, in one sentence, the very sentiment that many within the royal family privately held but would never say aloud. Insiders revealed that King Charles was briefed on the exchange by early evening. While he didn't comment publicly, aides said he gave a subtle nod of approval when the details were shared. It wasn't the words themselves that mattered most, it was the symbolism. Beckham had spoken not just for himself, but for a nation weary of being caught in the middle of royal drama. The fallout from the encounter was not contained to that day alone. Across celebrity circles, people began reassessing their affiliations. The Sussexes' grip on American media elites began to loosen. Celebrities who had once publicly supported their narrative began to fall quiet. The image of Harry standing isolated at Trooping the Color, rebuked by Beckham, began to overtake even the couple's most polished PR efforts. Meanwhile, Harry reportedly returned to his hotel in central London without comment. His team made no moves to engage with press. There were no interviews, no clarifications, no smiling departure shots. The silence spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, the Duke of Sussex was said to be stunned by the severity of Beckham's words. He had always expected frostiness from the royal institution. He had not expected to be personally called out by someone who had once shared his circle, his values, and his trust. Meghan, back in Montecito, was said to be furious. She saw the incident not just as a slight, but as a public humiliation manufactured by an establishment figure. Sources later suggested she wanted to issue a statement to clarify their version of events. But senior advisors allegedly warned her against it. The more they spoke, the more they lost. Silence, they were told, was now their safest shield. But the damage was done. Beckham had set a precedent. The moment was captured. The world had chosen its headline, and the narrative had shifted. This was not the Harry of 2011, flying Apache helicopters and winning hearts. This was not the charming younger brother standing beside William at Diana's statue unveiling. This was a man without a kingdom, trying to walk into a world that had moved on without him. And it was David Beckham, quiet, composed, and clear, who had drawn the line. The words may have been personal. The moment may have been brief, but its consequences would ripple far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. To the public, it had once seemed like a picture-perfect friendship. On one side stood Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the glamorous, forward-thinking royal couple who had captivated the world with their break from tradition. On the other side, David and Victoria Beckham, the stylish, disciplined British power couple whose fame had been built not only on football and fashion, but on perseverance, loyalty, and branding precision. Their friendship had emerged in the early days of Harry and Meghan's marriage, during the height of royal adoration and optimism for a new, modern monarchy. It began innocently enough. A few casual meetings, mutual admiration in the press, an invitation to the Sussex wedding in Windsor in 2018, and behind-the-scenes exchanges that hinted at the beginning of a solid alliance. Meghan was said to admire Victoria Beckham's sharp business sense and poise under media scrutiny. Harry and David, despite vastly different backgrounds, found common ground in philanthropy, sports, and their shared experience with intense public pressure. For a time, they were often spoken about in the same breath, two golden couples forging a new image of British prominence, both culturally relevant and influential beyond borders. When Harry and Meghan moved to North America, the Beckhams, then living part-time in Los Angeles, maintained casual contact. There were dinner parties, private discussions about charitable projects, and even soft whispers of a possible joint campaign involving youth mentorship and media accountability. It all seemed genuine. But under the surface, things were already beginning to crack. The first sign came quietly. In early 2020, shortly after the Sussexes announced their departure from royal duties and relocated to Canada, the Beckhams were said to have been ghosted. Invitations were left unanswered. Messages received curt replies or were ignored altogether. People close to David reportedly noted that he felt increasingly like a tool being pulled into a wider publicity campaign. Meghan, now firmly in control of the couple's media direction, began aligning herself with Hollywood names more strategically: Oprah, Ellen, Tyler Perry. Figures who could offer not only support but significant media platforms. At the time, the Beckhams didn't react publicly. David, in particular, valued discretion. His entire brand revolved around consistency, class, and dignity. He didn't chase clout, but he did begin to distance himself. No more joint ventures were discussed. Victoria, too, pulled back from the budding friendship with Meghan, focusing instead on reviving her fashion empire amid financial struggles. Then came the betrayal that ended everything. Sometime in mid-2020, a tabloid story appeared in a major UK paper alleging that Victoria Beckham had been the source of private leaks about Meghan's beauty regimen, lifestyle habits, and comments about royal courtiers. The story was minor in the grand scheme of royal scandals, but the implications were damaging. The tone was subtle, but the message was clear. Victoria had allegedly spoken out of turn. According to insiders, Meghan was furious. She allegedly confronted Harry, demanding answers about how this could have happened. Harry, leaning into his longtime distrust of the press and deep-rooted paranoia about leaking, reportedly reached out to David directly. It was that phone call that fractured everything. Beckham, blindsided by the suggestion, was livid. He felt insulted, especially because he and Victoria had always kept private their opinions and had never, at any point, spoken to the press about the Sussexes. David made it clear that he and Victoria had nothing to do with the leak and took personal offense to the accusation. There was no apology, no reconciliation, just silence. David hung up the phone and never reached out again. From that moment, the Beckhams and the Sussexes lived in different spheres. No further meetings were arranged, no collaborations discussed, and within weeks, those within the Beckham circle knew it was over. A source close to the family said David had confided to a friend, "I won't be treated like that. Not after everything." Meghan and Harry, for their part, continued building their brand around victimhood and detachment from the British establishment. Oprah interviews, the Spare memoir, Netflix docuseries, it all followed. But as their story grew louder, the people they had alienated grew quieter. The Beckhams refused to feed the fire. They made no appearances on talk shows. They gave no interviews. They simply moved on, choosing dignity over drama. This quiet resistance earned them immense respect, especially within royal circles. By 2022, it was clear the Beckhams were being drawn closer into the royal fold. David's increasing involvement with King Charles's initiatives, especially with the prince's trust and environmental campaigns, was not coincidental. It was deliberate, carefully planned, a reward for loyalty, a contrast to the chaos unleashed by the Sussex narrative. Beckham's public image continued to rise. He accepted ambassadorial roles, expanded his work with youth football programs, and made heartfelt public appearances at veterans events. His reputation was built not on tabloid headlines, but on years of sustained, meaningful engagement. Unlike the Sussexes, who were increasingly seen as cashing in on royal proximity, Beckham had earned his place beside the monarchy with patience and restraint. In contrast, Harry and Meghan's public support began to erode. Allegations of bullying within their staff, inconsistencies in their storytelling, and a growing sense of entitlement created fatigue among former supporters. More celebrities began to distance themselves. Brand deals faltered. Even Spotify ended its lucrative partnership with the Sussexes production company, citing low returns and inconsistent content. Meanwhile, the Beckhams continued their ascent. Victoria relaunched her fashion line with a well-received London show. David was appointed to head high-profile sports diplomacy missions. And quietly, behind the scenes, preparations were made to formally honor him for his contributions to the United Kingdom. The knighthood discussion began to take serious shape in early 2023. King Charles, now firmly seated on the throne, had begun reviewing names for his next round of royal honors. Beckham's came up early in the meetings. He had been shortlisted in years past but deferred by bureaucratic backlogs. This time, it was different. There was intent, not just because Beckham deserved it, but because the monarchy needed a contrast to Harry. Beckham was the narrative they wanted the public to embrace: duty, humility, national pride. He had never once sold a story, never once accused the family of anything. He showed up. He gave. He disappeared quietly. And so when Beckham showed up at Trooping the Color, he did so not only as a respected guest, but as a symbolic counterweight. A living reminder of what loyalty looked like in action. When he walked past Harry and delivered those 6 quiet words, it wasn't just personal. It was historical, because their falling out had come to represent a broader shift in British society. The era of tabloid chaos was ending. The public was growing tired of self-made victims demanding royal status while rejecting royal duty. They wanted substance again. They wanted honor. And David Beckham, once a boy from Leytonstone with nothing but talent in his boots, had become the embodiment of that. The fallout between Beckham and the Sussexes wasn't just about a single accusation or a broken friendship. It was about identity, loyalty, and the consequences of weaponizing relationships for public sympathy. Harry and Meghan had miscalculated. They thought their fame could replace trust. But trust, once broken, does not return with headlines. It returns through character, through time, through actions like Beckham's. Subtle, consistent, and selfless. And now, years after that severed phone call, David Beckham had spoken for the silent majority. "You're a backstabber. You don't belong here." 6 words. Years of meaning. And the closing of a chapter that may never reopen. Within the hierarchy of the British royal family, few members have mastered the art of discretion quite like Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Often overlooked by the press, Sophie had carved a niche as the monarchy's quiet confidant, reliable, measured, and unshakably loyal. She had no desire for headlines or controversy. But when the future of the crown came under threat, not through war or politics, but through a scheme buried in the shadows of charitable institutions, Sophie became the monarchy's silent sword. The unraveling began with whispers. Routine financial audits were taking longer than expected. Questions were being raised by Royal Foundation accountants regarding the disbursement of funds to certain overseas organizations. Normally, such discrepancies were chalked up to bureaucratic lag or clerical errors. But this time, the inconsistencies followed a pattern, one that tied back to the Sussexes. Long after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had departed their official royal duties, there remained lingering financial ties between their personal charity endeavors and initiatives they had launched while still under the royal umbrella. Archwell, the Sussexes Foundation, continued to operate under the premise of helping underserved communities, veterans, and mental health initiatives. The public face was noble. The reality, however, was beginning to crack. Sophie, who had been assigned to assist in transitioning some of these programs back under Crown management, quietly noted discrepancies during a late 2023 review. Her work wasn't done alone. She was assisted by 2 trusted advisors with backgrounds in forensic accounting, individuals who had helped the royal family through past financial restructurings. What they discovered shocked them. Several grants and donations made under the guise of collaborative royal initiatives had not reached their intended recipients. Money earmarked for specific causes, particularly those related to youth mental health, community development, and small business empowerment, had been funneled through a network of shell organizations registered in the United States. The paper trail led to a California-based LLC operating under a nondescript name, but the address linked back to a private office tied to Meghan's business management team. At first, Sophie refused to believe it was intentional. She requested more information, more time, more clarity. But as the data came in, the trend became undeniable. Funds raised during high-profile campaigns, many of which bore the Sussex name while leveraging royal titles, were never distributed to the charities featured in promotional materials. Instead, the funds were rerouted quietly and legally, but suspiciously, to this private entity in the United States. It was a betrayal wrapped in legality. Technically defensible, but ethically damning. Sophie was devastated. She had always extended grace toward Harry. Even after his departure, she had maintained a sliver of hope that reconciliation was possible. But this wasn't about bitterness or broken relationships. This was about the abuse of trust, the misrepresentation of purpose under the royal name, and the deliberate monetization of public goodwill. She knew that going public wasn't an option. The monarchy did not operate on impulse. It moved through strategy, layers of consultation, and quiet accountability. So she brought her findings directly to King Charles in a sealed dossier marked confidential, for His Majesty only. The meeting took place in the green drawing room of Clarence House. No aides were present. No security briefed. Just the king, Sophie, and the gravity of the truth. She presented the documents, laid out the accounts, and detailed the path of each questionable transaction. Charles didn't interrupt. He listened, occasionally nodding, his expression unreadable. When Sophie finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. For a full minute, the king didn't say a word. Then quietly, he asked, "Who else knows about this?" "Just 2 forensic analysts and my private secretary. They've all signed confidentiality agreements," Sophie responded. "And your conclusion?" "The funds were intentionally rerouted. This was not administrative error." Charles closed the folder gently, his hands clasped over it as if it were a weapon. "Then the trust has been broken, not just with the family, but with the people. That marked the beginning of a palace operation so covert, so delicately handled, that even senior members of the royal household were kept in the dark." A 3-month internal review was ordered under a new code name, Project Integrity. Sophie was appointed as the unofficial head, a role that gave her sweeping oversight into all royal-linked charitable operations involving former or transitioning royal members. Every transaction dating back to the Sussexes' departure was scrutinized. Meetings were held in the dead of night. Phones were placed on secure lines. Data was extracted and stored in off-site archives. The goal was not only to understand what had been done, but to determine if legal action could be taken without public exposure. In the process, another layer of deception was uncovered. The California-based LLC, listed under the name Greenpoint Initiatives, was actually part of a broader holding company owned through a Delaware registration. That entity, it turned out, had financial ties to an investment group that managed Meghan's intellectual property and branding ventures, including upcoming books, documentaries, and merchandising deals. This wasn't a charitable operation gone wrong. It was, by all indications, a funding mechanism. Sophie brought these new findings to the king's attention at a private weekend retreat in Sandringham. This time, the meeting included Camilla and William. The reaction was controlled, but explosive beneath the surface. William, according to palace sources, was incensed. He had remained publicly silent for years while enduring veiled accusations, bitter memoir passages, and media onslaughts. But this, he reportedly said, was a betrayal of the people who trusted the crown, not just a betrayal of the family. The king, for his part, remained calm but resolute. Legal teams were consulted. Letters were prepared. And most importantly, preparations for Harry's exclusion from future royal ceremonies, especially Trooping the Color, were formalized. But Sophie's role didn't end with investigation. She became a guardian of reputation. Working behind the scenes, she began advising charities who had been listed as Sussex collaborators, offering them gentle guidance on how to distance themselves without scandal. Meetings were set up with banking officials in London to flag the accounts used. Reports were submitted to Her Majesty's Treasury. Not for prosecution, but for oversight. It was during this process that the king made a quiet, personal decision. Sophie would be honored with expanded responsibilities within the family's charitable trust. Unspoken but clear, it was a reward for her discretion, loyalty, and brilliance. When the Trooping the Color guest list was finalized, Sophie's name sat prominently among the senior royal representatives. It was her first time attending the event with such significant placement. Many assumed it was a symbolic nod to her rising role in the monarchy. Few knew it was also a gesture of gratitude for what she had quietly prevented, a scandal that, if leaked, could have dismantled years of public goodwill. Sophie never once gave a comment to the press. She refused interview requests. When asked about her sudden prominence, she simply stated that service means listening more than speaking. But behind her composed smile and graceful presence stood a woman who had protected the monarchy from within, without ever drawing a sword or raising her voice. And thanks to her, the crown had reclaimed its integrity, silently, precisely, and permanently. It began with noble intentions, or at least that's how it was presented. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle launched their own charitable foundation after stepping away from royal duties, it was branded as a fresh, modern evolution of philanthropy. The organization would be global, data-driven, focused on compassion, mental health, climate change, and social justice. The public was introduced to this venture under the name Archewell, a combination of the Greek word archi, meaning source of action, and well, symbolizing a place from which hope would spring. In speeches, press releases, and glossy marketing campaigns, the Sussexes portrayed Archewell as more than a charity, it was to be a movement. Their powerful branding drew immediate attention and early funding from high-profile donors, celebrities, tech firms, and charitable institutions seeking relevance by association. But the most important thing it drew was public trust. A trust rooted in Harry's royal background and Meghan's star power. What the public didn't see, what would remain buried for over 2 years, was the financial sleight of hand occurring beneath that carefully polished exterior. According to a detailed internal investigation spearheaded quietly by the royal household, funds funneled into Archewell and its associated projects did not always end up where they were publicly pledged. The discovery began with inconsistencies in end-of-year charitable disclosures. Some of the listed grants did not match recipient organizations' accounting. Others were attributed to initiatives that never materialized. Yet the fundraising totals were declared as fulfilled. The team led by Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, examined several specific campaign cycles. One notable case involved a high-profile fundraiser for youth mental health launched in partnership with a well-known US-based youth advocacy group. Promoted through Archewell's official channels and mentioned in multiple interviews, the campaign claimed to raise more than $5 million in under 6 weeks. But when Sophie's analysts contacted the supposed recipient organization for routine verification, the charity reported receiving just under $700,000 and no explanation for the shortfall. Their executives had assumed the remaining balance had been rerouted to partner initiatives. However, no such entities could be traced. The missing funds didn't disappear into the ether. Instead, they were funneled, via a series of legal, yet carefully constructed shell companies, to a private LLC headquartered in California, operating under the name Greenpoint Initiatives. This entity, registered through Delaware for added anonymity, had zero public-facing operations, no staff directory, no website, and no charitable output. Yet it was receiving large and consistent transfers from donation-based accounts tied to Sussex-affiliated campaigns. Further digging revealed that Greenpoint Initiatives was managed by an investment advisor associated with Meghan Markle's personal financial team. The connection was clear. This LLC was a financial vehicle tied to the Sussex household, though designed to be at least 2 degrees removed from their names. But to those trained in tracing institutional fraud and donor misappropriation, the red flags were unmistakable. The money trail was technical, but not untraceable. Public donations, often solicited via social campaigns or virtual fundraisers, were deposited into Archewell's US-based charitable bank accounts. From there, legitimate operational expenses were processed, including salaries, media production, and staffing. However, between 25% to 40% of net donation totals from key campaigns were siphoned through strategic vendor payments and partner distributions to entities like Greenpoint. These payments were categorized under ambiguous labels: research development, infrastructure strategy, future program allocations, terms designed to seem bureaucratically acceptable, yet vague enough to evade scrutiny. Once in Greenpoint's account, the money was effectively privatized. From there, it was used to fund branded content, executive bonuses, property expenses, and legal retainers associated with ongoing media ventures. In other words, funds raised under the guise of helping children and mental health causes were being rerouted to sustain the Sussexes' growing commercial empire. Sophie's report included more than just financial summaries. It also documented communications between Meghan's business manager and legal counsel regarding how to structure offshore transfers in compliance with IRS 501(c)(3) regulations. While nothing outright illegal was uncovered at this stage, the paper trail showed a pattern of systematic obfuscation. Structuring money flow to appear compliant while failing to meet the moral and ethical standards expected from a charitable foundation bearing a royal imprimatur. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was a set of email exchanges obtained from a confidential whistleblower, an American accountant formerly contracted to assist in Archwell's quarterly reconciliations. In one message, a senior financial officer expressed concern about the optics of a large-scale transfer to Greenpoint, warning that donor inquiries may not align with where the money is ultimately going. The response came swiftly. This isn't about optics. It's about operational flexibility. We are building something bigger than a charity. This is infrastructure. The phrasing alone sent alarm bells ringing across the Royal Investigative Team. It wasn't merely a case of money being misused. It was a reflection of intent. The Sussex operation was less about charitable impact and more about constructing a narrative-driven media empire, financed in part by funds raised under philanthropic pretenses. When this information reached King Charles, his response was one of disappointment, but also of resolve. He understood that taking legal action against his own son would be a disaster for the monarchy. But he also knew that remaining silent and inactive would damage the crown's reputation far more. A compromise had to be reached, one that maintained royal dignity while drawing a hard line. The first move was to sever all remaining institutional ties between Archwell and any palace-affiliated programs. Quiet memos were sent to all royal-linked charities, instructing them to distance their messaging, branding, and partnerships from the Sussexes unless written approval was granted from the Crown's Oversight Committee. The second move was strategic silence. The king instructed aides to let the truth trickle out, not through scandalous leaks or tabloid drama, but through the steady erosion of influence. Archwell was allowed to operate independently, but without royal endorsement. This subtle revocation of support would make fundraising more difficult, partnerships less appealing, and public trust harder to maintain. And the third move was trooping the color. By barring Prince Harry from the ceremony, King Charles signaled, without uttering a word, that there were consequences for breaching trust. That being a royal was not simply a matter of title or lineage, but one of responsibility. The crown could not be a backdrop for private business ventures dressed up as altruism. The public, though unaware of the full financial revelations, began to sense the shift. Coverage of Archwell became less favorable. Commentators began questioning the foundation's actual impact. Donors began demanding transparency. And Meghan's increasingly polished yet hollow media appearances failed to halt the unraveling.